You anoint a king. So if someone's called the anointed one, that's a kingly title. Now this is very dangerous because what did I just say about how did you get to be a king in Roman-controlled area? The Senate had to appoint you. Anybody who set himself up as king without being appointed king by the Senate, that was itself an act of treason. So there were, though, other messianic figures who would rise and try to provoke some kind of revolt. The most important revolt of the Jewish people during this time started the year 66. Now we're in the Common Era. So this is 66 CE. It started in 66 with Jews in both Judea and Galilee revolting against Roman rule. They drove the Roman squadron out of Jerusalem. And in the year 70, the Romans finally, after 4 years of warfare, they had surrounded Jerusalem for a full 2 years. They finally took Jerusalem itself. They flattened, they destroyed the temple. So the destruction of the temple is the year 70, and that's probably the most important date for this course, because a lot of important things in Christianity, the early Jesus movement, happen either before 70, and they're one kind of event. Some of them happen right around the year 70. We'll talk about that when we get to the Gospel of Mark in a couple of times. And then some of them, most things happen after the year 70. But the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in the year 70 is not only hugely important for Jews, right? Because ever since then, Jews have not had a sacrificial cult. If you're a Jew now, where do you go to sacrifice? You can't go to the temple. There's the Dome of the Rock sitting there on where it's supposed to be. Jews substituted different forms of piety, reading the Torah, studying, praying, meeting in synagogues, meeting in other places. So Judaism changed radically beginning in the year 70, precisely because the place where you sacrificed was destroyed. Every ethnic group around the Mediterranean in the ancient world had its religion as some part of sacrifice. They all did. Sacrifice was just common among different groups around the Mediterranean. The year 70 caused the Jews to stop being primarily a sacrificial people because they had nowhere to sacrifice. The end of the Jewish war is dated by most people to 74 because that's the time when the final battle took place and the fortress that fell was called Masada. So if you go to Israel now, Masada is a shrine, a tourist spot and a shrine that celebrates the defeat of the last Jews at Masada, the fortress that Herod the Great had built. After that, Judaism changes. You have, I'm not going to go into much detail because the way rabbinic Judaism, what you know as Judaism today, if you know anything about it at all, is a result of developments that happened after 70. It's the result of the rabbis recognizing that the temple cult is no longer there. The rabbis, who are teachers of the law and commentators on the law, they become the central organizing feature, not the priests. So the priesthood, you still have Jews named Cohen, right, which means priest. But priests in Judaism don't really do much anymore. It's the rabbis who become important. So at the beginning of, around the year 200, you have the rabbinic Judaism starting to develop its written text, the Mishnah, the Babylonian Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud. And this is the birth, during these centuries, of rabbinism. That is, rabbinic Judaism as it comes to be important. There was another Jewish revolt in 132 to 135 called the Bar Kokhba Revolt, but that was suppressed by the Emperor Hadrian in 135, and that you had the complete destruction of Jerusalem. It was leveled. It was renamed Aelia Capitolina, a Roman name, and Jews after that were forbidden even to enter Jerusalem for a long time. Okay, what's important about all this? I warned you last time that last lecture on the Roman Empire, the Greek world, was going to be some just boring historical narrative, and you've had some of the same thing this time, where I just had to tell the story of what was going on in these centuries. But why was this all important for us? Here are the main things to take away from it. Hellenization was extremely important because it united the Mediterranean world, the Eastern Mediterranean, but then the Romans even took over some of the aspects of Hellenization when they took over all of the Mediterranean. By Jesus' time, all of Palestine was Hellenized to some extent, only to different degrees. So yes, if you lived in a village or in the country, you may not have spoken Greek. You may have spoken Hebrew or Aramaic. But if you were an elite person in any city, even in Palestine at this time, you were expected to be able to speak Greek. You had some exposure to Greek culture. Syncretism was very important. The idea that religions borrowed from each other. Religions were mixtures of things, and cultures borrowed from each other. So syncretism was very important. There was also conflict within Judaism. I tried to emphasize that. Jews weren't all agreed about how to respond to the politics and the cultures around them. Jews conflicted with Jews over how to adapt to Greek and Roman domination and culture. Political, social, religious, linguistic, cultural issues were all affected in some way. The next really important thing is the smallness of Judea. From the modern world, we tend to think of Jerusalem and Judea as being very important because, of course, that's where Judaism started off and that's where Christianity started off. But by the standards of the Greek and Roman worlds, Judea was a kind of insignificant backwater. It wasn't a big important place economically or politically, and Jerusalem was not that terribly important. Judea was relatively unimportant from a world historical perspective. But, and this is also very important for how this lecture plays out for the rest of the course, the Jews were never truly independent during this time, nor were they ever truly powerful during this time. Even when the Hasmoneans, Judas Maccabeus and his brothers and their descendants, were ruling for 100 years or so, they never were politically very powerful outside of that narrow area of Judea. They were never truly independent. They always had to fend off the greater power of Syria or Egypt or Rome. The important thing, though, is Jews had an ideology that supported imperial pretensions. Go back and read the first few Psalms, where God says to my anointed one, and here he's either talking to King David or whoever is supposed to be sitting on King David's throne, you are the king of the world. I will make all the nations flow to Jerusalem. All of them will come and worship me in this holy place. The Psalms are full of language that imply that whoever is in control in Jerusalem is the king of the world. And yet, the Jews looked around themselves and they're going, we haven't had anybody who approached that in centuries. The Jews had an ideology of empire and world domination embedded in their scripture. And yet their social and political situation was just the opposite. And it's in that maelstrom of Jewish ideology not fitting reality that Jesus is born. No sections this week. Look at the syllabus. On Monday, you'll be asked to come in with lists of historical events as you see them in Acts and lists of historical events as you see them in Galatians 1 and 2. Come in with your lists on paper because we're going to put it up on the board. Be prepared to tell me what you do for your homework and do the homework for Monday. Okay? It's not very difficult. It won't take you a long time. But follow the syllabus instructions and come Monday ready to talk. Thank you.